Hi everyone, and welcome to this month's episode of Nicole's Neighborly Advice. As your neighbor, it's my job to keep my finger on the pulse of everything new and exciting and popular in community schemes at the moment. And I thought that this month would be a perfect opportunity to reflect on the recent Scale conference hosted by Knox Cape Town that dealt with all things short-term letting and short-term rentals that I was fortunate enough to recently attend. And just on a nod to Women's Month this month, it's estimated that around plus minus 54% of all short-term rentals in South Africa are currently managed by women, which is wonderful. Opening up opportunity to people who might not have had it in the past. And although this is amazing, because we're also opening up opportunities to people of color, women, disabled people, and other previously disadvantaged minority groups, short-term letting can, of course, cause a problem in community schemes if it is unregulated. And it's important to note here that not all schemes really lend themselves to short-term letting off the bat. However, this is something that can still take place in that community scheme if it is regulated and managed properly. It's also important to note here, and this is a question that I get asked very often, is can my community scheme ban or prohibit short-term letting? And unfortunately, the answer is yes. However, to prohibit or ban short-term letting within a community scheme, it doesn't happen overnight, and it is a bit of a due process that needs to be followed. So short-term letting, and letting of course, is a conduct or a behavioral rule, which means that, to regulate short-term letting, you need to put in rules that regulate this behavior. So if you are a body corporate, you would put regulations relating to short-term letting in your conduct rules. And if you're a homeowners association, you would put rules relating to short-term letting in your HOA's estate rules or similar rule document. And should you have these regulations in place, noting that these regulations need to be specific to your scheme and how it can effectively help your scheme manage short-term letting, there is no reason that short-term letting shouldn't be successful in your scheme. However, to ensure that things run smoothly, I would like to give some recommendations on, the top rules or regulations around short-term letting that I always recommend that schemes who are pro or would like to not necessarily encourage but allow short-term letting in their scheme. I would say the top 3 rules that I would recommend including in your updated set of conduct rules or estate rules would be a minimum rental period, of course. So if your scheme lends itself to short-term letting, meaning you are pro short-term letting, your minimum rental period would maybe look like nothing less than 2 consecutive nights, nothing less than 3 consecutive nights, nothing less than a week. That's generally the most popular options that I see and recommend in schemes that are pro short-term letting. I never ever recommend anything less than at least 24 consecutive hours because you don't want any hourly rentals. So that's definitely a plus. And then of course, if you are looking to disallow or prohibit short-term renting from taking place within your community scheme, you would just include a much stricter minimum rental period. So for example, something like 30 consecutive days, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months. So nothing less than that time period. And that of course is going to shut down and prohibit people from renting for anything less than that period. It must be noted that for a community scheme, if an owner then does rent out their property to someone less than the minimum rental period, the community scheme cannot not allow that tenant entry into the community scheme or anything like that. The only thing that the community scheme would be able to do is take action against the owner that is participating in short-term rental and provide them with a written warning and then fine them accordingly if the contravening behavior were to continue. And then the second top tip I recommend if you are pro short-term letting in your scheme is every owner that is short-term letting their unit needs to provide a 24-hour contact person that will be available in the event of an emergency or a security incident or anything like that taking place. But I need to reiterate that it is not the community scheme's responsibility to deal with, administrative or management issues for owners of short-term tenants. And conversely, the security of a community scheme or the reprimanding authority of a community scheme can also only go so far with bad behavior. So, if you have short-term tenants, they're having a party, security's gone up, they're not listening to security, that security needs to be able to call someone that will be available, that will come to the scheme at that time and come and put some order and put things right. Because, of course, it's the owner's responsibility to ensure that their tenants are following the rules. Otherwise, they will be held responsible accordingly. And then the third tip that I'd like to recommend is, and this is a bit difficult, but I really stand by it and really hope that more community schemes enforce it. And that is that someone needs to be on site to meet the short-term tenants when they arrive at the scheme. Whether that is the owner or their nominated representative, but someone has to be there to meet the tenants, show them to the relevant place, unless of course you have in your scheme like a full-time concierge service or something similar, which I know more hotel-esque, upmarket, city center schemes would have, because they very much lend themselves to short-term letting and are almost akin to like a boutique hotel kind of. But meeting your guests upon their arrival and upon their exit is so important for the community scheme and the owner, because you get to meet your tenants in person, you get to get like a feel of how they're going to be, because of course you can't see everything online, You get to show them where they can park, you get to give them a physical copy of the rules, get them to sign a copy of the rules, you give them the keys in person. I'm very, very against lockboxes. I haven't really heard any positive stories of them from community schemes that I've worked with. And when you meet them upon their arrival, it also allows you more opportunity to view your property after they've left. And then if something's wrong, you can kind of still have a better chance of holding them accountable. And of course, I do understand that sometimes short-term tenants arrive or they depart at inconvenient hours, like in the middle of the night or something like that. And in that case, I think, or my recommendation is to just put a proviso in the rule that if you aren't meeting them upon their arrival, that you then do so as soon as possible the following morning or the following evening, in the sense that if they arrived in like 3 o'clock in the morning, you'll go pop in at like 10 o'clock the next morning, or if they arrived at 11 o'clock in the evening, you'll go pop in the next morning, kind of thing. So yeah, that's about it for short-term letting this month. I think it's a very popular topic and I could keep going for hours, but I think that that's just a little taste of, something pretty important that is happening in community schemes across South Africa. And also important to note with the Parliament and the South African government wanting to bring in some stricter regulations around short-term letting in South Africa. At the moment, they are looking to release the white paper legislation, so that's like the pre-formal legislation, in around April, May 2026 next year. And at the moment, the recommendation from government is that it's only a maximum of 90 days in a calendar year that someone will be permitted to short-term let. If you're going to be renting or short-term letting for longer than this 90-day period, you will need to apply for a land departure application, and it will be considered as running a business. So some interesting and important things to consider moving forward. I'll definitely keep my finger on the pulse for that and bring you any more updates as soon as those unfold. Thank you so much for joining me this month for Nicole's Neighborly Advice, and I hope to see you next month.